Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most revered in the history of Magic the Gathering. High Tide, Standstill, Destiny Spinner, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and TheEpicStorm.com. This episode is sponsored by 3-for-1 Trading and Sparks Law Practice. Thanks for joining us for episode 134 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Commander Bans and Legacy Format panel. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. I am Bryant Cook of the Eternal Glory podcast, joined by
Brian Coval, aka BoshNRoll, and there's no Phil this week. Sorry, everybody. Normally, Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU, is our co-host, and he is affected by Hurricane Helene, where he lives. He's on the edge of the storm. His town didn't get wiped out, but he did only recently get power back and does not have internet and can't be with us this week. So it's me and Bryant. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers and YouTube members. We've got Peter K, Jacob N, Nathaniel K, and Brainless Tuna on Patreon. Then we got Colin S and Maureen B from YouTube. And big news from the YouTube side. As of last month, our YouTube revenue is paying for our editor every month. So the Patreon is just, money in the bank. So thank you all for your continued support of this pod. It was actually, 2 years ago, we were doing this just for donations. We were losing money. We were spending time, and we introduced these new things, new ways to get access. The pre-show is actual bonus content, and you all really responded. So shout out to you all for supporting. Speaking of supporting the episode, we've got Sparks Law, a business transactional law firm owned by Eternal Magic community member Jonathan Sparks. If you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or gig worker looking to start your own company, Sparks Law could help with partnership agreements, contract reviews, intellectual property protection, or any other business legal questions. If you want to shape your business strategy with fellow Eternal gamer, reach out via email to jsparks, that's JSPARKS @sparkslawpractice.com, or call 470-268-5234.
And if you would like to advertise to over 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every single episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors. Plus, we have some bonus news. Eternal Weekend registration is live. Go check out the Card Titan website to register for Eternal Weekend North America.
And just a PSA to folks, because there was some confusion last year, you do need to buy a badge to enter the event hall, and then you need to pay for entry to the event. Event entry does not include hall entry, and hall entry does not include events. That includes like the VIP package. It does not come automatically with entrance to the event. So make sure you're getting everything you need to get. I'd hate to see anyone scrambling like they were last year, including some friends of the show who were just the morning of the event were like, oh no, can I play Magic this weekend? I'm here as a VIP. And they had to scramble to figure it out.
So, Brian, what are we talking about in today's episode?
Oh my God, dude. What a week in Magic the Gathering. The Commander ban list was updated. And for those of you who follow us for Legacy and stuff, I promise we're going to tie that in a variety of ways. We're not just going to talk about Commander bans, but basically Monday morning, I'm going to get my actual calendar up. Monday, September 23rd. We're recording this on October 1st, so 8 days later. The Commander Rules Committee, who is a group of 5 volunteers who manage the Commander format, separate from but alongside Wizards of the Coast, made an announcement that in their quarterly update, Nadu Winged Wisdom, Dockside Extortionist, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus are banned in the format, which surprised a lot of people. Bryant is making a stinky face right now as our resident combo psycho who loves fast mana. And, we both play CEDH, so obviously we come from that perspective where the environment where those cards rule. I think that before we talk about this, just some quick ground rules of these RC members and the Commander Advisory Group, who had nothing to do with this. They were as surprised as we were, basically, when the announcement went live. Have been getting a lot of crazy messages, death threats, threats of violence. Wizards of the Coast has upped security for these people at MagicCon Vegas. Some of them have canceled their plans to be there. It's really fucked up. And if that's your response to some cards being banned, touch grass, get therapy, unplug. Like, I don't know, just don't do that shit. So that is really important to frame what we're talking about moving forward.
I would like to say there's a difference between I don't think that this is a good decision. I think that this was terrible, and I hate you, or I'm going to threaten you over a card game. There is a pretty large difference there. And while I think that these bans were trash, absolutely stinky pants, I wouldn't go threatening somebody over it. At the end of the day, I'm playing digital cardboard most of the time, but even if it was physical cardboard, we're all adults. I know Magic is, a game for all ages or whatever, but you should also be trying to be setting an example for the people that aren't adults. You should know better.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so sucks we have to say that all, but community's full of weirdos, as we've learned this week. Let's talk about the bans themselves just quickly, because that's not really what this podcast is about. Nadu, I don't care. It's gone. I think Nadu is exactly the type of card that the Commander Rules Committee should be on top of, where it's a new printing, it does a big stupid thing, or a thing that really messes up play patterns, or it easily homogenizes gameplay in the case of something like Golos or Hull Breacher. And it's relatively new. It had an effect that wasn't good. It's not that expensive, and we could just nip it in the bud, get rid of it now. I think that's a great call. And I know there were Nadu players. A bunch of people picked it up for CEDH and were really happy with that. I know Gold Sabertooth, who's an artist in the CEDH community. He had Nadu summer shirts made and Nadu tokens, and it was really in on that life. All that merch is now I don't know, some defunct band from the 80s when you wear it. But in general, I don't think people are going to miss Nadu. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, but I do have opinions on the next one.
Okay. I will tee you up and then I'll let you go. Dockside Extortionist has been on... There has not been a watch list in a couple years. The Commander Rules Committee used to have a formal watch list of cards that they knew were causing some grief in some places. And it was a way to signal publicly, this card might not be safe. And they did away with the watch list a couple years ago, but Dockside was spoken about regularly by members of the Rules Committee as maybe this is over the line, maybe it's not. And I'm not surprised to see it go. And go ahead.
So I'm not surprised either. However, when you look at some of the announcements over the last, 2-3 years, they would mention Dockside Extortionist, but they would also say Dockside Extortionist is fixed by Rule 0. And if you're unfamiliar with Casual Commander at all, let's say Brian and I are sitting down. We have a conversation about the power level of the game we would like and what we would like our game to look like. And Dockside Extortionist, for the most part, was only seen at high-end tables. Because in low-level tables, Brian might not be running Mana Crypt or, Jeweled Lotus or other powerful cards. Instead, Brian might be running Rampant Growth or other effects that generate mana over the course of a longer game that don't die to board sweepers, because that's the sort of thing that Casual Commander is about. So Dockside Extortionist didn't even really see play at the lower power levels because it wasn't good there, because there's more Rampant Growths than there are Talisman or Signets or whatever. So Dockside sort of just only worked at the top tables. And then in this ban announcement, they said that none of these bans were aimed at CDH. Well, I kind of don't buy that. Because if you look at all 4 of these cards, Nadu was a competitive deck in CDH, Dockside a CEDH card, Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. All these cards were higher power level cards that they banned for the casual side of the format, where I don't think you actually got a lot of this. You might have gotten some people slipping in a Jeweled Lotus, but most people knew that Mana Crypt was for high-powered or CDH. It wasn't something that happened in casual a lot. So I do feel like some of their explanations are a little bit far-fetched or sketchy, but there's a long document that you can read on why they did this, but I just think that it's not exactly believable. I think that there's something else going on there.
Okay, so we can save the conspiracy part for later. I think that Dockside has been regularly discussed as tends to select for high power games, but there's a lot of people who just don't know. Like, even, like, we've talked about this before on the pod, and the hyper-enfranchised player, the type of person who would be on Twitter following Rules Committee members, or the type of person who would be listening to a Magic the Gathering podcast. Chirp, chirp, chirp. You listening right now. You're hyper-enfranchised. And yeah, Bryant also hyper-enfranchised, me hyper-enfranchised. We know that there is discourse about cards like Dockside Extortionist, Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, where it's like, maybe this is too fast for a table with 3 strangers, and maybe the game won't be any fun because you're just stomping their face in, and it's not fun for them, it's not competitive for you, nobody's having a good time. But people who just like bought the pre-con Dockside Cayman, and they have that card in their collection, and they just put it in decks, or they opened a Mana Crypt, or they opened a Jeweled Lotus out of their packs they got for Christmas or whatever, they're going to put them in decks, and they might not even know that that's not cool in some places. So like, basically the idea behind these bans is like, games get out of hand, and the people doing it might not even know that they're doing it. Where like, you open a Mana Crypt, your friend trades you a Jeweled Lotus, suddenly there's some 6 mana commander with Ward 5 that draws 3 cards every turn that you could play on turn 2, and you think that's cool, and you just don't know that that's ruining the game for everyone else. And maybe you all don't have the language to talk about how that's not cool for our table. I don't know. Like, there are folks who will never hear any of this conversation, but I promise you they have Mana Crypt in their deck. So I don't know. That's all complicated, but...
So to bring this back to Legacy.
Yeah, let's go.
How exactly do these bans compare to Legacy?
Okay, so we talked about Nadu and Dockside, which I personally think are both fine bans and unsurprising. Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus are shocking bans. Like, this is where the real insanity starts, because the whole format is built on Soul Ring. Soul Ring literally comes in every precon. Everybody has a Soul Ring. You show up at MagicCon, they give you a bag with 2 Soul Rings in it. They're literally just throwing these at people. And to then ban Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus because fast mana is out of bounds is freaking wild to me. Like, the jumps you have to do to make these things the same. And they did address it in their big article. They basically said, yeah, by a consistent position, Soul Ring would meet these criteria too, but Soul Ring is the like poster child of the format, and we're not going to ban it. And that's all they had to say about it. But Soul Ring, because it's in every precon, is a couple bucks. Mana Crypt was like $200 when this announcement came. Jeweled Lotus was like $125, $150. This was a nuclear bomb on the value of collections for cards that only get played in this format. Like, if they banned Underground Sea, there's still Legacy and Vintage and Casual 60s and stuff. Jeweled Lotus only casts your commander. There's nowhere you could play that card if you don't have a commander. So that's why this is so shocking. This is genuinely as if Wizards of the Coast announced on a random Monday that dual lands were banned in Legacy or fetch lands were banned in Modern. This is just cutting out kind of the core chase engine of something that someone who cares about this format would have invested in.
So another point is that, and I mean, we used to believe this too. We've had podcasts saying it, but like, ban Daze, ban Brainstorm, ban Forcible Wasteland. Those are pillars of the format, in my opinion, has shifted over time. And this is a good example of what happens when you pull the rug out from underneath the community, when you ban a pillar. It would be like banning Mishra's Workshop or Bazaar of Baghdad and Vintage. It's just not acceptable. And this public outcry, and people got very upset, more upset than I believe that they should have, because you should never make threats. That said, this is why Wizards of the Coast doesn't ban pillars of the format. It's not just because they love each format having a pillar, like Brainstorm or whatever. It's because they don't want the community to act out. And, oh well, we saw some of that this week.
Right. And I spent years joking about Mishra's Workshop in Vintage. Just why can you play 4 of this card? And look at all the artifacts that are restricted in Vintage. Because Mishra's Workshop exists, we could restrict shop and unrestrict all that other stuff. And while I believe that is still true, I am now a full believer in format pillars should be left alone, give the format their identity, and keep some semblance of stability. Because you could still play a lot of decks without Mana Crypt or Jeweled Lotus. Like, the mana's worse, but you could still play those decks for the most part. entire wedges of the competitive EDH format were built around Dockside Extortionist. Like Goblin Matron and Goblin Recruiter were format staples in decks that could only get Dockside Extortionist with them because that card was so core to engines. Decks using cards like Emil, the unicorn guy, to flicker Dockside as their end game. Decks that have reanimate and sack outlets to put Dockside in and out of the graveyard a bunch of times in the same turn. Dargo, the commander. There's a bunch of combo loops with Dargo that all rely on the treasure output from Dockside Extortionist. Like, lots of decks just got nuked. And there's decks like Rogsai, Brian's signature deck that I'm also a believer in these days, and the deck Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, that mostly just shrugged these off. I mean, they played some of these cards. Kinnan actually only had one of these cards in it instead of the three that Rogsai had, but you shrug it off, you play other cards, life goes on. But that's not true. It is really like if they banned Mishra's Workshop out of Vintage, but left Bazaar of Baghdad and Ancestral Recall. It's like a ThrabenU, get wrecked. It was a big shakeup.
So, Brian, I did watch your video on the bans, and I thought it was great, by the way. But one thing that I thought was pretty interesting is how you broke down the last year of Commander sales and how Jeweled Lotus was the flagship card out of one of those sets. And then on the following set, it was actually Mana Crypt. And it seems weird to me that they would have planned this out, because in the public statement from the rules committee, they said that they have been talking to Wizards about this for a full year. Meanwhile, Wizards of the Coast was advertising Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt as these reasons to buy collector boosters or go for the chase, like, I forget what they call them these days, but basically like expeditions or like rare things you can pull out of packs that are like very limited.
Yeah, special guests, I think, is what the sheet is called. Every set has them these days.
Yeah, I'm just a boomer and I could only think of expeditions. But it seems weird to me that they would have created this advertising. Would you like to go a little bit more in depth, or maybe you just want to do a cursory glance for our podcast audience?
Yeah, I'll just go quick. And it's not that surprising. It's just frustrating because Commander Masters came out 13 months ago, and the flagship chase card in that set is Jeweled Lotus. And if you go to the Magic the Gathering official Commander Masters website, if you open that up, you will see Jeweled Lotus. This is the card that is put in front of you first. And if these conversations were happening a year ago, Wizards of the Coast was currently selling those boxes full of Jeweled Lotuses. And no way you could ban that while that is currently the thing. Because if a set flops on rollout, it's bad. Like, that's months of work and like financial disaster and, people in trouble, and you got to answer to the corporate overlords and all this stuff. And it's not good for a Magic set to fail, not for any of us. However you feel about expensive cards or just play with proxies or Commander sucks, whatever your opinion is. If a Magic set fails at launch, it's bad for all of us. And we all want to see this game thrive and go on. So you can't just ban Jeweled Lotus while it's currently the marquee card on a set being sold right now. 11 months ago, Lost Caverns of Ixalan came out with Mana Crypt. And Mana Crypt, same story. If you go to the Lost Caverns of Ixalan official Wizards of the Coast product page, you see a Mana Crypt, which is not even a card in the set. It's on the special guest sheet. They're not showing us some cool dinosaur or some cool god from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. That's full of cool mythics, but they're showing us Mana Crypt because they know that's what was going to sell. And 11 months, well within the range of we've been talking about this for a year that we heard. So it is frustrating to know that we were just pumped products that they knew might not be viable at some point in the near future. But at the same time, Magic sets are developed 2 years in advance. So what are they going to do? Like, just have a set that's DOA? Start telling us, like, you could open... Because Lost Caverns had, 6 different versions of Mana Crypt. One of them was selling for $3,500 before the ban. Like, these were highly collectible items and big reasons to crack packs. And you just can't cut that out from under a set's release. And I don't think this is a conspiracy theory as much as just obviously you can't allow this to happen at the time where this happens. But also, just 2 days before the announcement happened on Monday, that Friday, I received my Festival in a Box from Las Vegas. MagicCon Vegas Festival in a Box comes with the Mystery 2 booster. That also came with 3 collector packs in it. And 2 of the 3 collector packs were Lost Caverns of Ixalan and Commander Masters, which feels like a dump to me because every other Festival in a Box that has been released has come with draft product, not collector boosters. So why would they suddenly need to yeet untold thousands of collector boosters of those two sets out of their warehouse? I don't know. It is annoying. It makes sense. They're a company. They got to make money. They're not your friend. They're trying to make money off you. Them making money makes Magic better. So this is sort of a symbiotic relationship, but that is just it is frustrating to look at the timeline of what we've been told these things happen versus the things we can definitely know of when products were released and what the expensive cards were in them.
For sure. And it's a big blow to customer confidence too. Like if you were to buy one of those Festival in a Boxes, you assume that the thing that you receive will still be useful by the time you receive it. And that was not the case here. But I think a more interesting thing would be, what does this do for gameplay? And we're not going to dive super deep into that just because this is a legacy podcast for the most part. Well, Eternal Magic, you could argue that Commander is part Eternal. But I think in general, for both casual EDH and competitive EDH, things are going to slow down. Without Mana Crypt, without Jeweled Lotus, without Dockside, things are just going to slow down. And I think that's why they did these bans, because they felt like Magic was getting too fast. But also, if every deck has a Mana Crypt in it, and Gavin Verhey talked about this today, and we'll get to the live stream, but if every deck has a Mana Crypt or a Jeweled Lotus, that means that deck building just starts a lot shorter. Instead of being 100 cards, it's 90. If every deck has a Command Tower and a Soul Ring and everything else. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And it's tough to print better than Jeweled Lotus or Mana Crypt. But if you're not allowed to play with those cards, that creates design space. So I do feel like, okay, this makes sense from their perspective, but I want to play with Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, and I know that I'm not the only one.
Right. Yeah. In terms of casual EDH, there's a lot of folks who just didn't have these cards anyway. We're never going to have them unless they came out of a pack randomly. But a lot of folks don't engage with the game in a way where they're maximizing for power level anyway. There was a weird group of people on the internet last week who seemed to be maliciously excited about the ban to the point of laughing at everyone who owned a Mana Crypt, calling them, a sucker. And why would you spend money on a card ever? You stupid idiot. Like those people, they're unaffected. Casual EDH is probably better off without Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus and Dockside, Extortionist, and Nadu available to it. However, the CDH, we touched on this a little bit already. Whole wedges of the format just got axed by Dockside not existing anymore. They got to find new engines. Nadu was obviously its own standalone deck. The whole deck's gone. Sorry to everyone who purchased a Sea King's Blessing for $35 or whatever it cost during the Nadu era. And yeah, Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt are a serious loss to basically all decks in the format.
So to bring this back to Legacy again, I think the big thing is collector confidence being shook because, Brian, you owned like 6 Mana Crypts. You had like 3 Jeweled Lotuses. Owning big expensive collections was just proven to be a liability. And I think that's really terrifying as someone who owns 40 dual lands. And I know that's going to sound like a brag, like, Brian, you don't need to own 40 dual lands. But I've owned them most of my life. It is like, in my mind, I'm not looking at these like an investment, but I know that if for some reason, if there was ever something terrible that happened in my life, that I could get rid of these and at least bail myself out. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, or will it be the case by the time that I need that money. And I think that's sort of shaken me a little bit seeing them ban Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, because now I'm not sure if Wizards of the Coast is going to make more erratic decisions. Because in my opinion, banning Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus, those are erratic decisions. Mana Crypt was part of the format's identity to me, and that means that they could ban other cards that are a part of that format's identity. And I think dual lands to Legacy are a direct parallel.
Right, and the reserve list protects cards like dual lands some amount, but the reserve list wouldn't protect dual lands from getting banned out of Legacy. And obviously that's a huge jump. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I didn't think this was going to happen either. And it is important to separate that the Commander Rules Committee was not a Wizards of the Coast entity, but clearly they were working side by side with Wizards of the Coast and keeping them abreast of what they had in mind, based on just common sense. You can't have 5 civilians basically managing the most valuable product of $1 billion business. Obviously, they're going to have eyes on that and a hand in the pot throughout. But yeah, that was a weird, erratic thing that shook me up. And you mentioned I had a bunch of cards. Like, I'm a legacy player. I've been playing Magic since 1997. I don't think I've ever sold off all my cards. I've sold cards here and there, like sell this to buy a different deck when I'm younger and I can't afford to just keep everything. I had the same thing as you, Brian. Like, I had a few years where I was just out of college trying to find my feet as an adult in the world, and eating ramen noodles and saltines with peanut butter on them for dinner because I didn't have any money for groceries. But I was able to absorb some amount of risk in life and take chances, like go back to school and pay for grad school when I was already broke because I had this Magic collection behind me. Like, I had a set of Power 9, I had a bunch of dual lands and stuff. I knew I could just smash a button and have $10,000 in my pocket in a day or two if I needed to at any point, which is a safety blanket many people don't have in life. Like what we see, the articles and stuff that are like, the average American is like $400 away from financial disaster. Like, you just flip your car, the injuries aren't covered, you can't afford to replace your car, and now you're in the poorhouse. Like, a lot of people do live on that edge. And because of my Magic collection, I was never on that edge. I always could come up with money quickly. And a lot of people don't like the idea that Magic cards are an investment, but they are. Like, I don't know what to tell you. We're a legacy podcast. We're talking about a format that is based on dual lands, which have only gone up and up and up and up every year forever. And if you're moving into the legacy space, and I have a lot of people in my Discord or in my local community who I talk to, and they're like, I just bought my first tropical island. I can't stop staring at it. I'm so happy. The willingness to spend $400, $500 on a tropical island, whatever it costs these days, is entirely predicated on the ability to get some of that back someday. Even if it's not all of it, but I would not spend $400 or $500 on a card to play the One Piece TCG, even if the gameplay was awesome, because that game has not stood for 30 years. That game has not proven the test of time that it's a stable place to put money. There's a lot of things that are not true about just other games. And no shade on One Piece, but you know what I mean? Plug in any game that is not Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic into that spot, because games die after 2 or 3 years, and Magic is going strong. I owned 6 Mana Crypts and 5 Jeweled Lotuses, kind of on the back of, yeah, this is a big stable thing. I've been around here a long time, and it's cool. But suddenly it was not cool. And like yourself, we talked about this in the pre-show a little bit. If you've been playing a long time, sometimes your collection just bloats. Where I had my first playset of Force of Wills I got so I could play Legacy, and then I got a super beat up, horrible set on the super cheap. And by super cheap, I mean like $12 per card back in the day for a second set of Force of Wills. So I didn't have to move them out of my vintage deck. Then I have an EDH deck. Now I have 9 Force of Wills. And then like a year later, I build another EDH deck. Now I have 10. Suddenly you have 16 Force of Wills. You don't need that shit. And a card like Force of Will that's not on the reserve list is not somewhere I'm happy hanging my hat or owning 16 copies of anymore. Like, I sold a bunch of them this week. I just went in and found the Force of Wills, the Chalice of the Voids, the Chrome Moxes, the Mox Opals, the Mox Ambers, like all these things in my collection that I had more than 4 of. And I was like, these got to go. Mana Vault, that's a big one. I sold 3 of those this week. Just, these are not cards that it is safe to own lots of copies of. That's how I feel right now.
And I mean, all it took was banning Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. And I feel like now this is a great example of that customer confidence being shaken. And I'm not trying to scare people into selling their stuff. What I'm trying to do is remind you that it is not safe to own a super large collection like Brian and I have. And maybe if you own some superfluous cards, get rid of them, or at least acknowledge the fact that you could be at risk of a reprint or it being banned, things like that. It's really not a scare tactic. It's just, I am questioning some of my collection at the moment. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and when I was doing that big prune this week, this is going to sicken some people, and other people are going to say, hell yeah. I owned 165 fetch lands. That is the number of those that are in my collection. I have a full set for Legacy, I have a full set for Modern, and then I have a bunch of Commander decks that just play 8 to 10 of them because they don't follow the color identity rules, and you could fetch an off-color duel with an off-color fetch in a 2-color Commander deck or whatever. I just had so many of those stupid things. And some of them I was able to prune, like the Zendikar Rising Expedition ones. not the original Zen expeditions, but that the middle of the ground ones, the one that had like the angular robotic looking frames. Had a bunch of those I could get rid of, but I was looking at my Cons of Tarkir set, and those are so cheap now because they've been reprinted so many times. It actually wasn't even worth it for me to prune those cards out of my collection. At the price I could have gotten for them, I'll just leave them in the binder. But a fetch land, what's more solid and stable multi-format staple than a fetch land? But the fact that they're willing to smash the reprint button like this makes it affordable, which is great for people who want to play Legacy and Modern. And I want all of those people. It is more important for those people to have access to $10 fetch lands than it is for me to, just bank 150 fetch lands and get rich. So I am happy to eat that L because it means that the format is accessible where it can be. But I was just kind of surprised that I own so many of these things and it's really, really not an investment. I'm sure I would lose money on every single one I sold today.
So let's talk about the announcement from this week.
You want me to do this?
I think you should, because you have the exact date and stuff like that. I could give you like what I believe happened, but.
Okay. So we're recording this October 1st. Yesterday, November 30th, which was exactly 1 week after this ban announcement, the Commander Rules Committee announced that they are disbanding. They are transferring all of their duties to Wizards of the Coast officially. They were citing the threats and the harassment that they received throughout the week. They realized that they don't have the bandwidth as 5 random civilians with day jobs volunteering their time to manage the beast that has become EDH. I saw Rachel Weeks from the Game Nights Command Zone organization. She said it was like nursing a kitten that you found on the street to a healthy adult cat, but then it grows into a tiger and you got to get rid of it. And that's kind of the perfect metaphor for what happened here. This little community run format by Sheldon and his friends became a big community format, became the flagship offering of $1 billion company. And maybe 5 random people who are not game designers and not doing this as a full-time job random is not fair. They're 5 carefully selected, highly passionate people, but they are civilians. They're not game designers. This is not their full-time job. They don't have access to Wizards' vast network of information coming from the world. Maybe those people shouldn't be in charge of something like banning Mana Crypt.
So a quick anecdote that is not at all related to Magic the Gathering, but my wife works for the state of New York for the Department of Environmental Conservation. Once or twice a year, they get a phone call from someone that doesn't realize that they've been raising a large cat. I'm not even joking. Like bobcats, there was one that was a mountain lion, and New York State claims there's no mountain lions here, except one was definitely turned in that somebody was raising. So I'm just saying that you might be raising a tiger is more common than you might think.
Yeah, and the Commander Rules Committee, they had one. They thought it was just a cute little cat, but then it ate their dog, and they had to give it up. The immediate news from Wizards of the Coast, so we wrote our show notes live. Like yesterday, I wrote out a bunch of these notes, and then today, Bryant and I watched the live stream from Gavin Verhey and Aaron Forsyth together with more information. So if we rehash anything or it feels disjointed, sorry about that, but we're doing our best. Yesterday, they said they're working on official power brackets to help players define their decks in ways that are useful to find the correct game for them. Right now, the number is 4, but that number could change where it's like a 1 is cards that come out of precons or are fine anywhere. A 2 is like stuff that's a little more powerful. A 3 is like my deck has Drannith Magistrate in it. A 4 is like my deck has Vampiric Tutor and Armageddon in it. And that's just like, my deck's a 4, my deck's a 3. A lot better. And they're trying to give specific criteria by which to define that rather than every idiot at the Command Fest saying my deck's a 7 based on my own personal metrics.
And I think that's great that they're assigning values to these cards. Like Vampiric Tutor being a 4 makes sense. And your deck is defined by the most powerful card in your deck. So you could be playing Pauper Cycle Storm as a commander deck, but you put a Vampiric Tutor in there, it is now defined as a 4, which seems a little bit odd, but you could also just rule 0 it. The rule 0 is not going away. But if you let people know, hey, my deck is actually a power level 1, but I have this 1 card in there, they might be okay with it. But for the most part, it's about assigning that value so that way you find games that look like what you're trying to do. And I think that makes a lot more sense than just, oh, no time walks or none of this. Like, this is going to help regulate the format in a meaningful way. And I think that's a huge improvement.
Right. And all of this still being developed. Wizards of the Coast took over the format literally 2 days ago. On the live stream today, Gavin was basically, they were getting a bunch of questions and Gavin was like, I don't know, I have a meeting after this live stream where we'll start talking about that sort of thing. Like, it's very new, but this is the rough thing that they're laying out. The article also said they will be examining the ban list, but not with the intent to ban more cards, and making any changes not a priority. So that sounds like, to me, veiled language that there's probably some stuff they want to unban. Maybe
Mana Crypt.
Maybe Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus.
Mana Crypt.
Yeah, if these like brackets or tranches or whatever we're going to call them are established and they work, then Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt are just force. Put them in the forward bucket. It's great. And obviously Magic players, gamers got a game, MTG Finance got a finance. Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt spiking again today after cratering last week on the secondary market. Cards like Primeval Titan and Coalition Victory just spiking on the secondary market. People making moves on things that they might be able to make money on in the future. So the machine never sleeps.
My favorite thing from the live stream today was a lot more subtle than some of these more exciting announcements. But Aaron Forsythe talked a little bit about managing formats. And this applies directly to Legacy. And Aaron Forsythe said, we use data and sentiment for managing 60-card formats. Managing Commander's different because it's mostly just sentiment. It's how are people feeling? And when Aaron said that when they look at sentiment and Legacy, it's are people happy? Are they happy playing a format that tends to be a little bit more broken? Or are they upset playing something that Wizards feels is healthy? And they use sentiment somewhat, but it's often backed by tournament data or Magic Online data. There's none of that exists for Commander. It's just feels and vibes. And that makes it a very difficult format to manage. And this was really fascinating to me, just hearing a little bit more of how things work behind closed doors, because that's always the more interesting thing to me as someone who's interested in development and things like that.
Yeah, and these Wizards of the Coast live streams are great. Anytime you get a Wizards employee talking about their process, especially a high up one like Aaron Forsythe, you realize how much better they are at this shit than you or me or the Commander Rules Committee. People who don't do this for a living. They are thinking about things so much better than us, and they have processes, and everyone on the internet who's like, Wizards doesn't know what they're doing is just wrong. Like, you might not agree with everything they do, and right now we're in a period of Legacy where basically all of us think Grief should have been banned 3 months before it was. Then we would have known about Psychic Frog 3 months before we did. And now we have an Eternal Weekend metagame that's going to be defined by Psychic Frog, and that could have been avoided. I believe all that to be true too. But saying that Wizards of the Coast doesn't know what they're doing or they don't care, I don't believe that's true for a second. I think they're so much better than anybody else at doing this.
Carmen Handy, I think, did a really good job on her last weekly MTG where she talked about the grief banning. I thought that was so fascinating to listen to, and it was very similar to what Aaron Forsythe was saying about, that look behind closed doors, Wizards of the Coast philosophy and all that stuff. So I'm with you, and getting that insight is super valuable. But one thing that I would like to mention regarding like the Rules Committee and Eternal Weekend and all that stuff coming up is, I'm gonna lie to you, I had a point and I was like hoping that by the time my ramble came back, I'd remember it, but I didn't. So we're just gonna move past it.
Okay, when you remember, let us know. Yeah, just some quick hits from this Wizards live stream. People asked the obvious question, now that Commander is directly in the hands of Wizards, are you going to be making decisions that make you money rather than keep the format healthy? And Aaron said two things that are really important. One, he said, as a VP of the company, the buck stops with me. Hasbro wants things, my bosses want things, but I have a lot of freedom to make decisions. And secondly, he said, we want Magic to last forever. Keeping the game the most fun for the most people is how we make the most money, which I think is really important to remember. If a lot of people upset about secret layers and stuff. Like, this is just gouging. It's cashing out on FOMO. It's a cash grab. Like, maybe so, but that's cash in the coffers for them to continue paying employees to develop new sets. And we get to have cool new stuff come out every year. You don't have to buy secret layers, but some people like them and they're making money. This is a win-win for everyone involved, as long as you aren't the sucker on the hook getting your cash grabbed.
So I know that people hate hearing this, but like, this product wasn't meant for you, but it's true. Like, you don't have to buy secret layers. Like, that is one of the most like mind-blowing things to me, is that people are upset that a product wasn't for them. Like, I remember thinking like the My Little Pony thing was like the start of it. I just remember thinking like, man, I don't want My Little Pony cards in Legacy. Like, I just don't want that to happen. But then they printed the Walking Dead cards, and I was like, oh, these are so cool. Because I love The Walking Dead. I own the entire run as comic books. And then I was like, oh, well, that's why they're doing it. They're making something for everyone. And secret layers are that. So even if you hate Universe Beyond, I am so excited for Final Fantasy. Like, I grew up playing Final Fantasy games. I love the Jurassic Park ones. I bought literally every single Jurassic Park Japanese foil dinosaur I could, and I put them in a binder. So there will be something for you if you're just a little bit more open-minded. Or even if there's not, let's say none of this is for you and you truly are a Universes Beyond person that like is like, oh, I hate it, it stinks. Like, get over yourself. Like, Magic is for everyone. It's not for you specifically.
And I know we all have our own experiences, but mine is that I'm playing a game. Like, the numbers and the abilities. Ben Stark, Magic Pro Hall of Famer, famously said, if the card had no art, I would still enjoy Magic just as much. And I'm not sure that's true for me, but at no point in a game of Magic am I thinking, I am a wizard on the plane of Dominaria. These are the spells I know in my library. And, oh no, Iron Man, now I'm pulled out of it. This sucks. That's not a thing I do. It's like, okay, that's the One Ring. That's going to be tough to beat. They're going to have 3 more cards before their protection wears off. And, Captain America, that's a 3/2. Okay. Yep. Hexproof. You got it. Got to work around that. Like, that's how I'm thinking about this. And I know we all engage in different things, but as a sweaty spike, like, I'm going to play with the cards that are legal in my format. And they just have numbers on them. And sometimes I look at the art, but I usually don't.
So Captain America is definitely going to have Ward, because Ward is the shield. I'm just calling that right now.
Right. I try not to acknowledge leaks, and I'm not going to say anything too much, but some Marvel cards have already been seen on the internet, and Captain America is one of them.
Oh, well, I didn't know this.
Yeah, don't worry about it. So
okay.
We got to get this episode going. We're really talking here. We were worried without Phil we might need some help, but yeah, we are running long.
Who's Phil?
Yeah, who is that? ThrabenU? Okay. Important message from the WotC live stream. We'll wrap this up quick, then we'll bring it around to the legacy format panel, which is what you all came to hear about. There will not be separate ban lists. The power bracket system has to do the work. That's something Aaron said. The bulk of decision making will focus on low stakes play, but someone from the CEDH community will be included on whatever panel they make to get feedback from the broader world. They cited the Pauper format panel multiple times in the live stream. And what they said about that was that panel was an admission that we don't have the expertise in-house to manage that format. We do have that expertise for Commander, but we don't have a global perspective, which is what the external group will provide. So that is important to set up our next conversation, which is the legacy format panel, because they just said why they made a Pauper panel, and that feeds directly into the idea of a legacy panel. But before we do that, let's hear from 3-for-1 Trading. They are one of Europe's leading Magic the Gathering traders. Their online shop has a fantastic selection of high-end Magic cards, especially for vintage, legacy, and old-school players. You can find them at shop.3for1trading.com or visit their booth at major events. They run weekly sales, and new individually scanned high-end cards are added every Wednesday. Use code Eternal Glory to get our community-exclusive offer of free worldwide shipping on your first order over $500 and experience their world-class customer service and exact grading for yourself.
So let's talk about the legacy format panel. With Pauper getting a format panel, there's a lot of questions like, when will Legacy get one? You don't have the expertise in-house. Clearly, cards like Expressive Iteration took too long. And one thing that you just mentioned is that Wizards of the Coast admitted that they didn't have that perspective in-house. However, they do have a lot of ex-Legacy players in-house that went from grinding Star City Games events a decade ago that now work inside. You have Carmen Handy, Michael Majors, Dan Musser, people that know what they're doing. And I feel like that is a pretty big difference between Pauper and Legacy. Not to mention, Legacy is a beloved format. Not that Pauper isn't, but it's been around for a very long time, and people like playing with Brainstorm, Fetch Lands, all this stuff. Like, there's always been people in-house that, even before Dan Musser and that crew, that played Legacy. Like, I remember, who was it, Brian, that was like, oh, we played Mystical Tutor, and it broke the gentleman's rule.
No, I don't know. I don't know this story.
Oh, really? You've never heard that before?
No, tell the story. What is this?
They were testing in like 2008 or 2009 with Mystical Tutor Reanimator, and they were just like, oh, this is way too good at getting in tune. We have to ban this because a couple of people broke the air quotes gentleman agreement on Mystical Tutor for Reanimate, so they just needed to ban it. But before that, it was okay because there was the quotes gentleman agreement, and that's what they used in the article explaining the ban.
Oh, fun. Yeah, the good stuff.
I think it was Michael Turian. The name came back to me.
Mike Turian. Okay. Yeah, one of the OGs, by the way. One of the highest ranking Wizards designers who's been doing this forever. One of these people who's way better at this than all of us combined. So yeah, shout out Mike Turian.
And I mean, that was all the way back in 2008 or 2009. So Wizards has had these people for a very long time. But I think one thing that's interesting about the Pauper format panel is it's truly global. And the rules committee was not. It was a lot of, for lack of a better term, white people from North America making decisions for everyone, which I can see why a global company for a global game doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. The original group was 5 white guys. They added a woman. They added a person with Indigenous background from Canada. And then it ended. So something that Jim said, I'm actually going to save this. I'm going to go in order. But yeah, the Pauper format panel was specifically people from various continents, various perspectives. The Commander Rules Committee was a group of friends, just literally a group of friends who found themselves in this position where they were in control of this phenomenon. And then it slowly grew out of control and then was given away, which was, a painful process. Anything said here is with the utmost respect to those people. I'm not trying to be a dick. But in terms of the Pauper format panel and the Legacy format panel, the idea of a Legacy format panel, it's important to specify, I guess, if you don't know anything about this, that this thing doesn't exist. But a lot of people wish it did. The day the Pauper format panel was announced as a group of people who would provide direct feedback to Gavin Verhey, who would take that feedback back to Wizards of the Coast, and then Wizards had the option to act on that. The PFP does not ban cards. They offer opinions to Gavin, who can relay information to the people who do ban cards. That's important to understand. But the day that project was announced, a bunch of people were like, we need this for Legacy. They clearly don't know what's going on in there. And a bunch of people were tagging people who they thought would be good on the panel. A bunch of people stood up and said, I should be on the panel. And this whole collapse of the Commander RC is a big lesson. I know people on the Pauper format panel personally. I know multiple of them. And they get a lot of shit. They get so much shit. Some of them even before they were on the Pauper panel, just because they were people in the Pauper community who either wrote articles or put up tournament results or whatever, were getting a lot of shit regularly. And it is a burden. It is not a pleasure. It is not fun for these people to be on this panel. I don't think anyone was selected who would enjoy having the power, because they also barely have power, for what it's worth. They have the power to DM Gavin directly, and then he can go do stuff with that information. And they get so much shit. They get threats. They get just the worst of it from the dumbest people imaginable all the time. And the Commander Rules Committee was the most empowered community format management group in the history of the game. This was as endorsed by Wizards of the Coast as a community format group could ever be, and they just disbanded over harassment and safety issues. That's the reality. It's like these were the chosen ones in the benevolent hand of Wizards of the Coast, and they could not deal with what they were receiving from the public.
So I would like to make a quick comparison here. So with the decision from the Commander Rules Committee, they banned a card that was worth $200 to $250, and then a card that was worth roughly $130 to $150. And that doesn't count Dockside Extortion as being $90-ish. Nadu was only like $6 or $7, but whatever. So when you look at Pauper, the most expensive card in the format is like Snuff Out at $13 or Lotus Petal at like $15. Like, it's not as much money. And I understand that I'm saying, oh, well, a playset of Lotus Petals is only $60, and $60 is groceries or half a tank of gas or whatever you got to do in order to get by. Like, okay, well, I know $60 isn't half a tank of gas. I'm just rambling, but you know what I mean here. That is real money that could go other places. But the money is so much more when you're looking at Mana Crypt or Dual Lands or something else.
Right. And the responsibility to make decisions for legacy players who own reserve list cards, like that it's heavy. And as we just found out from the Commander RC this past week, it can be dangerous. And to be a leader of anything, you have to be able to told that you are trash by the dumbest freaks in the world every single day without losing your shit. You have to be like, okay, thank you for your comment. I will bring that into consideration with the group. You can't be dunking on people or starting fights on Twitter or whatever it is that you would like to do when these dumb weirdos tell you some shit that is completely out of pocket. Just, they are so wrong all the time. And on this podcast, especially in the pre-show, if you like hearing venting and raging, check out the pre-show. That is generally where we do that. But we talk about the just insane YouTube comments and social media interactions we get just as content creators. Like, I probably read and manage 100 to 200 comments a day between YouTube and Twitter. Just these responses from people to something I did in my video or something I tweeted or whatever. Just this week when I was selling off some of my extra Commander stuff, those, extra Force of Wills that I mentioned, somebody responded just out of nowhere. They were like, what information do you have about the next impending ban? Who is your source? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about, bro? I'm just selling off some extra cards. Like, somebody just saw me selling cards and came in aggressively with, what do you know and who is your source? And that is, at least in the realm of reasonable. I didn't like the tone, but like, just managing YouTube comments. And I'm not responsible for anything. If like my YouTube video cost somebody $200 out of their Magic collection, I can't even imagine. And then scale that to the millions of people who play Commander, or the thousands or tens of thousands of people who play Legacy, or the actual MTG Finance investors who would be affected by a Legacy ban list, even if they don't play Legacy themselves. Do you want that responsibility on you? Because I freaking don't. That sounds awful.
So I ended up watching, I'm going to mess up their name here, but is it the Command Zone?
Yeah, Game Nights, Jimmy and Josh.
Yeah. Yes, exactly those two. I watched a podcast that they did where they talked about how troublesome or the burden of knowing that you're going to be stripping $500 out of people's wallets in order to possibly make the game better. Josh personally disagreed with the decision. However, he ended up doing the decision, or they ended up going forward with it because Josh was on the Commander Advisory Group, but not the RC. And in it, they were not included. And he's just like, in order to make that decision, you have to have a lot of faith in what you're going to do, because you're stripping all these people of at least $500 or whatever. And you have to believe that. And I fear that people believe that banning dual lands might make Legacy better, because then it's in a more affordable format. More people could play it. It could be more like Modern. And I don't want Legacy to be more like Modern. I want Legacy to be Legacy. And Legacy to me involves dual lands. I think one of the great things that Wizards has actually done is reduce the amount of dual lands you need by printing other powerful lands. Like when you look at the Surveil lands, every deck went from needing 3 or 4 Tundras or Underground Seas down to 1 or 2, because now you have a reason to play less dual lands. And that is incredible to me. I want to see more of that.
Yeah, Surveil lands cut 2 dual lands out of basically every fetch land mana base. That was actually a huge money-saving thing for the legacy community, even if it is subtle.
Exactly. And I'd like to see more printings like that. I'm sure other formats don't, but that is the kind of thing that I would like to see. Give us reasons to play less dual lands. Like the Epic Storm plays 3 right now. That is incredible as a 5-color deck.
Right. And I'm going to read a quote from Jim, who was one of the members of the Commander Rules Committee. He's been a member, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years now. He was one of the people who was added from the core group. And remember, this is a quote coming from one of the most dedicated, passionate, and supported by Wizards of the Coast people that there's ever been. And what he said was, "What's become clear to me is that fulfilling my commitments requires a level of global connectedness, proactive and reactive communication, research, and skill beyond what I am capable of providing. I don't think it's possible for a group of part-time volunteers to rise to this task." That's powerful. And everyone's saying there should be a legacy format panel or volunteering to be on the format panel. Do you think you have that skill set? Do you have that time? Do you have that global reach? Because I don't think you do. I don't think any person does. Like that is stuff that needs to be managed by someone with millions of dollars at their fingertips. And global research, global brand management, a global impact. We're talking about a Fortune 500 company. We're talking about Hasbro. You can't do this. I can't do this. These people who were tasked to do this and did a pretty good job for a number of years could not do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you here. One thought that I did have is before this entire, for lack of a better term, shit show happened last week, you also saw the death of the CEDH Rules Committee that died before it even arrived. They, like the official Commander Rules Committee, tried to self-appoint themselves. And people were just like, yeah, and why would I listen to you, random stranger? And I feel like that is almost the same as the actual Rules Committee, where it's like, oh, this random stranger I've never met says I can't play Mana Crypt before. I'm just going to keep on playing Mana Crypt. And that could work with your friends at your kitchen table, and there'd be nothing wrong with that. However, once it's in Wizards' hands, it becomes more official than some random people on the internet saying you can't do this. Because it's Wizards. Like at the end of the day, they are the end of the line. They're the ones printing the cards. What they say matters.
Right. Yeah. And the CEDH Rules Committee was a response to the Commander Rules Committee, the people who had been talking about for the whole episode, saying, we are not going to manage for CEDH. That's not our charge. That's not our purview. We're aware of you. We care about you, but we are not going to ban cards based on your needs. If you want that to happen, it should come from inside your community. That's the thing they said. So this group of people said, okay, we will. And then a bigger group of people said, the fuck you will. And it basically, died on arrival. They were saying, never mind, within 48 hours of the initial announcement. And in that announcement had a bunch of things wrong with it. But at the core of the intent was, we were told, you better do this if you want it. And we want it. And we stepped up to handle it. And turns out, couldn't handle it very quickly. And there's currently another effort being made, a more slow, meticulous broader community-led effort to do a similar thing for CEDH. And we'll see how that goes. That group laid out a year-long plan for even selecting members. That's how long and intentional this new group is. And we'll see if that happens. We'll see if they hang. I'm rooting for them, of course. I do think CEDH would benefit from some management. But, I mean, it is hard to be in charge of anything, especially something that affects passionate people like Magic the Gathering, and especially something that affects the money of the passionate people holding Magic the Gathering cards.
For what it's worth, I think with the announcement today, that committee is likely dead. They could try to self-appoint whoever they want to be their CEDH Rules Committee, but with the actual Commander Rules Committee going in-house and then Wizards planned for the 4-format tier, I don't think that Rules Committee is going to get very far. That's my own personal opinion.
So it seems like that is not just an intent to appoint people who can manage a CEDH ban list. It seems like a attempt to centralize how can you find events, centralizing deck primers, resources, how to get into the format, how to get better at the format. It seems like a large basically the epicstorm.com, but for CEDH kind of effort seems to be what it's about. And Wizards in their live stream today, they all were very clear. We want representative from CEDH in the group of people who talk about EDH on the official capacity. And if that group can find 5 people that the community tends to agree on represent them, and then those 5 people can send a delegate to Wizards of the Coast, that seems like a great use of that resource. So we'll see where it goes. I'm rooting for everyone. Just like Aaron Forsyth, I want Magic to be the best for the most people. And I want Hasbro to make money so they keep making it so I can keep playing it. And I am with it. I think this week was a jarring shakeup, and I did not expect the fallout to be so heavy so quickly. There is 2 ways to look at this, where it's the community was so unhinged that people had to stop doing work they were doing. And another work is a decision that was made that was so bad that the whole team got fired. And even if it is about harassment, which shouldn't happen, a decision was made that, I don't want to say invited that harassment because that's so victim blamey and just like wrong, but people wouldn't have been yelling about losing all this money if Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus weren't banned. So there is somewhere in between the two of community freaks ruined this and a bad decision was made where reality actually sits.
So they had Olivia on the rules committee who said, no, don't ban Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus. And then she was outvoted. And then a bunch of people doxed her, sharing her real address plus other sensitive information. And it wasn't even her fault. Like, she wasn't the one that wanted that decision, but because the group doesn't, share their votes or whatever, that wasn't known. And then Olivia was targeted of the attacks. And I think that's really unfortunate. However, I do think that she was the most level-headed out of all of them. And yet she was the one that was targeted the most. So the community just stinks sometimes. And I get that. And I feel bad for the rules committee. But she was trying to save them, but they didn't want to listen as the voice of reason. Yeah,
Olivia is the nuts. Just wonderful person, great contributor to the Magic world, and she was the voice for reason. I actually think the Commander Rules Committee would still be together if they had listened to Olivia. I don't think it's a stretch to say that. I think Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus were the killers here. I don't think they would have gotten these death threats and stuff over Jewel Lotus or over Dockside and Nadu. And I don't know, a line was crossed because they didn't have that global reach, that research, that whole team of people dedicated to this. They don't have a game designer. They don't have any of this shit that they need to balance a decision this big. And, lights out. It's a new era.
Well, whenever CDH does get this person on the new commander panel or whatever they would like to call it, I would like to be the lobbyist that sends dirty money to that person to get Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus unbanned. Or, let's put more guns out there. And by guns, I mean Mana Crypts. That's exactly what I want to do.
Yep. Bryant will be buying a fancy steak dinner to whoever that is and taking them to his private island. And, who knows what happens out there, but they're going to come back pretty happy. So I am excited for the future, even though it does suck that we got here in this fashion. Consumer confidence needs to be regained. And, I hate to say it, but bless the reserve list, because right now we need something stable.
People aren't going to like that.
No, I don't like it either, but it's how I feel in this moment.